Jujutsu Kaisen chapter 237 has Hakari keeping his promise to Kashimo, the god of lightning reveals his curse technique, and Sukuna finally unveils the transformation that was heavily hinted at years ago. So let's go ahead and rub salt into the wounds of the Gojo believers who thinks it's not Gojover, and well, hate to break it to you, but the narration starts off by saying it's not battle of strongest anymore, it's battle against the strongest from now on. But more importantly, throughout the rest of the chapter, there is nothing hinting towards someone recovering Gojo's body, the reaction from Yuta, Yuji, and Maki, and knowing that Gege is probably going to save those reactions for future chapters is definitely exciting, but nevertheless, as Kashimo enters, one more player joins the battlefield. Standing aloof on a massive lump of ice is none other than Urame, but who also arrives there is Kinji Hakari challenging Urame, and says that he made a promise so he can't let Urame live. Hakari opens up his domain and Urame activates ice formation against him. Now, we've seen how powerful of an attack that ice formation can truly be, but we also know just how ridiculously broken Hakari's domain expansion is as well. And promising that he was gonna deliver the goods not just to Kashimo, but to say, hey, yeah, I'm not gonna let you live, most likely due to the death of Gojo. This is going to be an exciting battle. And more importantly, I think Gege is also establishing if Kashimo gets his 1v1 with Sukuna, I think that's fine, but also expect to not be surprised or disappointed if there's outside interference from this point forward. So even though Hakari's domain captured Urame in it, the boulder of ice continued to fall. It suddenly evaporates and Kashimo notices that it was all to deliver something to Sukuna, and that is the cursed weapon which Yorozu constructed in exchange for a binding vow of death, the cursed tool Kamotoke, which I'm probably butchering, but hey, now Yorozu's gift is finally unveiled. And there is some nice parallels that we see here, similar to Mai. As she departed, she gave Maki her weapon. Now we see Yorozu doing the same thing to Sukuna. And when we get a close look at this weapon, it looks similar to the Vajra. According to a quick Google search tells me that it's the weapon of Indra. The Vajra is considered one of the most powerful weapons in the universe, and it destroys both internal and external enemies. It is a thunderbolt based weapon. So this is when Sukuna launches an electric attack on Kashimo with this cursed weapon and says good old times, and coincidentally, Kashimo's cursed energy has made him resistant to electricity with the biggest no duh, but I still like the confirmation that even if it's Sukuna and with his weapon of choice, it doesn't even have an effect on Kashimo because, well, his curse technique is based on electricity as a whole. Kashimo then questions Sukuna and asks, did you become the strongest or were you born as the strongest? Which is a nice callback in parallel to what Geto asked to Gojo back in the Hidden Inventory arc. Are you the strongest because you're Gojo Satoru, or are you Gojo Satoru because you are the strongest? And this further implies that this question is a lingering question that we're most likely going to learn via Sukuna's flashback, but this is something that Gege seems to be really diving into. So I'm really curious to see how this question becomes a full circle into Sukuna's life and even into Kashimo's. As we see here that Kashimo asks Sukuna to teach him if strength is to be alone and find a place to properly show his powers. Is it the punishment of the strong people? So basically, Kashimo is asking for Sukuna for answers because quite frankly, the only person who can relate to Kashimo is Sukuna and Gojo himself, which does spark an interesting talking point as to whether or not Gojo, before fighting with Sukuna, if he had a conversation with Kashimo, getting his perspective on the topic. Because Kashimo was the equivalent of Sukuna and Gojo in his era, it would be nice if we get a flashback to Kashimo asking Gojo, hey, you're the strongest in your era, right? Is this a blessing and curse that we have to deal with? Which were talking points that we saw throughout the Gojo versus Sukuna battle. Sukuna replies that he don't know because he was an unwanted child. Kashimo asks, how did Sukuna interact with others without knowing weakness? Or did he show affection and mercy? Because Kashimo says he couldn't do so. He saw all other humans as pieces of dirt. So Kashimo definitely leading on the selfishness of Sukuna and to Gojo's selfishness as well. But interestingly enough, Sukuna says he was an unwanted child. We know he was known, or the title of becoming the disgraced one was something given to him, but he was also an angel once, according to what Angel said way back when during the Calling Games when we first saw her. Sukuna's flashback is slowly unraveling to be something really fascinating that I can't wait to get. This is where Sukuna calls Kashimo extravagant, much like calling Gojo magnificent, and says that even Gojo thought the same way. Sukuna taps his head with the weapon and calls upon Kashimo to fight him, and this is where now Kashimo versus Sukuna begins. Kashimo tries to land a hit on Sukuna using his staff, but Sukuna blocks it with his weapon. Kashimo moves back and now activates his curse technique, Genju Kohasuku, which translates into something called Phantom Beast Amber, which is going to make sense when you see the full image, which I'm kind of scared to show, so maybe you'll get it for like 2 seconds in this review. Pop, there you go. After landing a punch to Sukuna's face, Kashimo loads a breath type attack and blasts it at Sukuna. The narrator explains that Kashimo's curse technique remakes his body to be able to blast any kind of attack which Kashimo can make from his curse energy. We learned here that Kashimo manages to land another punch. His curse technique enhances his agility, and the waves he blasts evaporates anything which gets touched, but Kashimo surpasses its human body to make this happen. Thus, once his curse technique ends, Kashimo's body will break, which is just either heavily alluding to him being completely weakened, or the moment that his curse technique is drained and gone completely, like he is just actually dead, which now makes sense as to why he can only use it once. Because when you think about it, maybe it's not the best comparison, but it's kind of like Goku using Kaioken, right? Like Kaioken, where he'll increase his body 10-fold, 20-fold, etc. The narrator then begins explaining that Sukuna had a method of reviving his original body only once without using reverse curse technique, but Sukuna had intentionally halted it, which, going back to chapter 235, he revealed that he needed Mahoraga to defeat Gojo. Now, whether or not that conversation of whether Sukuna could have taken Gojo without 10 shadows is yet to be determined, but I do like knowing that Sukuna could have revived his original body at any time, but chose not to because we saw how beneficial it was having Mahoraga against Gojo. In any case, we see the heavily hinted four-armed Goro monstrosity that Sukuna is back. As the narrator lays, the transformation of reincarnation has been restarted, and whether or not this means Sukuna's full powers is going to go back to 100%, much like in any video game when you face off against the final boss where you drain their energy, but then they somehow get their energy at full health because bigger monstrous form, is yet to be determined with Sukuna here. But if we see this four-armed monstrosity that Sukuna has now become, what happened to Megumi? Is Kashimo going to deliver on his goods? And once again, if you want to see the full battle of Gojo versus Sukuna in all of its glory, you're going to want to click on this video right here.